Welcome to Chapter 8. During this chapter, we're going to be discussing race and ethnicity as lived experience. So let's get started. As sociologists, we realize that you can't see a person what is called the generalized word race. In fact, what we say is that race is the real or the perceived biological differences between groups of people. Today there are DNA tests, and people are often take them and are surprised that they are not strictly this certain race that they assume. In fact, what is a topic is there's the theory that there are no pure races out there. And of course, there are no superior races at all. That is definite. There is a show on PBS that is called Finding Your Roots. And on finding your roots, they check your ancestry and tell you the stories and get the facts. But then they do the next step further. These are famous people that they're finding their roots from. And then they check the person's DNA. And then they compare that to other people that they've had on the show. So they say, turn the page and see who you're related to. And they flip the page, and suddenly they're related to someone very much the opposite of the way they look. So, if you had them side by side, DNA would not look like they would not look like as what we would assume the same race. But they do have very similar DNA. In fact, they have different chromosomes there. So, uh, these are things that they're discovering is we're actually saying it's the real or perceived look of people, the biological piece, and it can be real or just perception, and it puts people into groups. Another example would be the Asian community. It can be based on where you live, your geography. So maybe someone's making an assumption because someone looks Asian that everybody is Chinese. They all look Chinese. In fact, maybe they look different. So then that would be different categories that people are put into. Uh, in that case, everybody that's Asian, they put into a category, when in fact they are very different in that part. There are different looks and different hair qualities and facial features. And so we see the same thing with all these different people and the way they look, but instead there's often a generalized category that people are put into or grouping. That is what's considered race. Ethnicity is a socially defined category based on common language, religion, nationality, history, or some other cultural factor. Where are you from? What religion are you from? Language. These are things people will often ask or look to find out about someone. So, symbolic ethnicity is an ethnic identity that people do on maybe on special days or occasions that may happen. For example, you have St. Patrick's Day. It's not really interfering with anything else. It's just that certain day. Or you could have a daughter's 15th birthday. For the Latina culture, that is going to be a very different day. It's not going to stand out from doing it every day. It's, again, a quinceañera, so it's a birthday. But it is very part of their ethnicity, and so you're going to notice that. Situational ethnicity could be another example. That is where your identity is either displayed or concealed, based on how it can be useful. Maybe not speaking your traditional language at work, only at home, or wearing your jeans out and about versus wearing your traditional clothing, or making sure now you're worshiping at home and not letting others know. So these are forms of ethnicity. From the book, It states that racism is a set of beliefs about the claimed superiority of one racial or ethnic group used to justify inequality and often rooted in the assumption that differences among the groups are genetic. An example of that would be during Dominican Republic and the Haitians. They live on the same island, but they are separated by a river. Dominican Republic traditionally has some racism towards the Haitians. It is based by the color of the skin, primarily. If someone that is Dominican, they typically have a lighter Spanish looking skin color versus Haitians who are typically have the skin color that is much darker. When someone is typically called a Haitian there, that has been a racial slur. Children are taught different thoughts about people that are Haitian. So it is based on the way that they look, and they're put into a genetic and into a grouping based on the way they look. And then people can use that to justify the inequality because of that superiority that they have. The other one is prejudice. So, prejudice is an idea about the characteristics of a group that is applied to all members of that group and is unlikely to change regardless of the evidence against it. So during 9/11 and right afterwards, there was a big uptake in people looking at people that are of Middle Eastern descent or look similar to them and saying they were terrorists. In fact, I was on a plane flight. There was a gentleman next to me with, darker skin and dark hair, and people were whispering about how, what if he's a terrorist? They weren't saying that about me. They weren't saying it about the person with the other person that looked similar to me, but they were saying it about him. They were putting him in a group, and they put so many other people that have the Middle Eastern or even had any small look distinction of that into a specific grouping. And during that time period, there was um, a lot of slurs said. There was a lot of damage and vandalism to property, and so even today, there is still a lot of that prejudice, specifically from that event that happens to anyone in that group or that has rather been placed into a group. So let's go over a little bit of discrimination of those details. So discrimination is the unequal treatment of individuals based on their membership in social group, usually motivated by prejudice. So we did go over the fact that, social groups, it's often people are put into social groups based on ethnicity and race. Then, so let me give you an example of some discrimination. A person comes in to apply for a job. They have dark skin, and maybe say the owner turns them down. And the person says to themselves when they leave, like, I can't believe I didn't get that job. And the owner is back there saying, I would never hire someone of color. That owner feels superior, and they just participated in discrimination. Now there's individual discrimination. So that could be the person, if that person is not the head of their company, maybe was the person over human resources at a hospital. That person individually does not want people of color working there. They have assumptions or bias that they've developed. And so they tell them, no, we're not hiring. So they did some individual discrimination based on their decision and their based on the way they viewed things. not necessarily the way the company did. But comes to find out, the company says, we will only hire people of color to work at this hospital that serves people of color. But we will not hire people of color to work at the white hospital, the one that serves white people. That would be an example of an institutional discrimination. We saw this at one point with the school system. They were determining who could go where. It was systematically decided. This can happen with politics, economy, educational system, etc. And that affects all members of that group who come in contact with them. So anyone that would have applied for that one hospital would have been pushed to the other hospital, vice versa. Did you know, believe it or not, that the United Nations has a committee on the elimination of racial discrimination? So I want to give you a direct thing that says the pledge that they have under this UN committee on the elimination of racial discrimination. So the pledge people, all the different countries have to say is they pledge not to engage or practice any racial discrimination against individuals, groups of persons, or institutions, and ensure that public authorities and institutions do likewise. Not to sponsor, defend, or support racial discrimination by persons or organizations, to review government and national and local policies, and to amend them or repeal laws and regulations which create and perpetuate racial discrimination, to prohibit and put a stop to racial discrimination by persons, groups, organizations, and to encourage integrationist or multicultural organizations and movements and other means of eliminating barriers between race and discourage anything that tends to strengthen racial division. This convention came together in 1967. The question is, are these different countries following this? Do we have hope that this would actually be true and follow the ideas of the UN Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination? So that's something you could look at as a sociologist. I think discrimination and looking at with the form of ethnicity and racism is going to be great as a sociologist to explore. When doing research, for example, you're coming up with a theory and you're looking at two variables, or you're wanting to do a study specifically, a lot of times we'll do the thing where we look at race and ethnicity. You can pull these typically from the census or questionnaires. If you go to either a doctor's office, you're applying maybe for a position. You may even have someone coming around and doing a survey themselves. That's going to be possibly on that sheet asking you what your race and ethnicity are. So we sometimes use those to help us with determining a theory, and we use that as one of our variables with our research. So there are different ways that you can start exploring the different things with racial and ethnicity when you're doing your research. Some of the ways can be with it being a family. You're looking at the household, the development, maybe the diversity there, the families, the relationships. Are they living with grandma and mom and two kids? Are they living just one person by themselves? Is it people of two different races living together or two different ethnicities living together? you may see a whole variety of things. So that's one thing that you can look at when you're doing your research, and we explore those elements. And does that part, the family piece, impact one of your variables? The other one could be health, such as medical conditions. We can look at it and see this person's more likely to have this medical condition, or um, this group of people are more likely to have a higher death rate, or the other thing is we can look at their access to health care or the location they are towards hospital services. These again help decide on some of the policies, the services that are available. If they are starting to realize that there is a high population of people that maybe are Hispanic that have maybe they're getting cancer, a certain kind of cancer. And they discovered that by doing some research along with some scientists, and they're going to also use that as sociologists to explore and find those families that have it or those individuals, and they can combine those efforts in their research. The other one would be education. So some of the things are not every school is the same. We've seen where there are some schools that don't have the same benefits. If you don't have a school that speaks a certain language, well, most of them only speak English. Do they have interpreters there? Do they have English as a second language there? Do they have food that the child is used to eating? Do they have programs for children that are new to the public school system there? You're going to be able to see that. And also, maybe, is there put in place where there's an expectation for the child to go to college in one school system because of their race and ethnicity versus another one based on their race and ethnicity? Is that determined with their education? So are there counselors and teachers that are encouraging them to go, or are they discouraging them to go based on their race or ethnicity? That would be one that you could look at. Where there's also work and income. We have definitely seen a disproportionate amount of people with lower income wages based on their race and ethnicity. And of course, occupations, we see more of those hands-on occupations, non-skilled workers that are in certain situations there. So again, remember in our previous chapters how we talked about how income and a job puts you in a social class. Well, all of these actual racial and ethnicity, they can put you in a grouping, and then it's put in a social class. And then what happens is people can sometimes, because they're put in a lower level, how do they go back and provide for their family? How do they get child care? It keeps on spreading through all the elements of people's lives. So again, another variable to research. And of course, the last one is criminal justice. We have seen a higher percentage of people with specific ethnicity or racial components that have been imprisoned. You can explore things such as people that have committed the same crimes, but how they're sentenced and how long they're sentenced for those crimes. Is there a higher percentage of people that uh, are arrested for that crime within that community? So that's another way that you can explore. So again, we're going to see family, we're going to look at health, look at education, and look at criminal justice, and work and income. So those are some great areas that you can use those ethnic and race portions to explore further. And the way that we do that is we explore it not only to come up with theories and provide that research there to help prove that theory. Remember, we're the detectives we can go further and use that they're used for policy making, for decision making in community, for services provided, for nonprofit opportunities, for health care. Maybe they have with the health, maybe the health department brings in a new program and specifically goes to do more research to help provide people. So these are definitely very important to have. So there's symbolic interactionist. This could be the focus on how we perceive and interpret race in everyday life. So this can be vary from place to place as well. So, what we have that's considered symbolic is here. We also, what we assume is race here could be different than maybe in Egypt. So with this example, someone sees a Latino woman, they assume that she's not born here, and they start speaking Spanish to her. So that would be a symbolic interactionist. Even though she's born here, she may not even know Spanish. Conflict theory. That's going to be the struggle for power and control. Example of that can be the gentrification. That is where, they're going to change the norms of the community. So in that situation, the people that have lived there for generations, they have their own form of community. They may have a specific race or ethnicity, and yet another group that's powerful is coming in, taking control, causing people to move away. They're buying up properties around them, and slowly they're being edged out so that community can be broken up, or the norms of that community can be broken up. Some say, you look at maybe the NODA community, people are saying that had some gentrification going on. Or you look at some of the what's more up and coming neighborhoods, there were more traditional communities of ethnicity and race that were there. And so those have been uh, forced to move or broken apart. So again, there's that struggle of power and control. The structural functionalism. This is where there is, think of the word structure. They want structure and they want it to be cohesive, even if it's the cost to inequality. As sociologists, the thing that we can do is we can see when we're measuring or researching, we can look at the inequalities or the dysfunction instead. So that's something that we want to look at. The functionalism with structure, that is where they're saying everyone has a role or a part, and they're to create the structure and the overall success, no matter what it happens in the process. So, in conclusion, we need to always keep in mind about race and ethnicity and the different forms of discrimination and the structures. So, when you are looking at developing a theory, you can look at the variables, and many times discrimination, race, ethnicity does come into play, and you want to see how that is impacting either the community that they're in or maybe the theory that you have. You can look at the past history of the area or events that have happened. It's very important to use your research and make sure you use your terminology when you're doing your research. It will help you narrow it down. So thank you for this chapter. I want you to go ahead and take your Chapter 8 quiz. Remember, all of your assignments are due by 11:59 p.m. on Sundays. And if you have any struggles or you just want to have a chat beyond email, I'm happy to do that with you online. Make sure to email me. Allow 1 week for grading and 48 hours for email replies. And lastly, if you don't have my email, it's julie.young@cpcc.edu. I look forward to our next chapter together.